the investigators would call us back and say, we caught him right before he attacked again on Friday. Those victims, they don't even know they would have been a victim of crime, a victim of the next serial killer.
Hey, it's Ann Emerson. All of you armchair detectives out there, how would you feel if you could help solve a crime? Like for real. Today, you're going to find out how. Joining me today is Kristen Mittelman from Othram, which is the leading forensic genetic genealogy company that is helping solve crimes through DNA. And you probably heard something about this already, but Kristen, thank you so much for coming to the show today. I cannot wait to hear about this. It sounds like everybody out there has an opportunity to make a difference.
It's true, and thank you for having me.
Kristen, tell me about Othram.
Othram was purpose-built to build the infrastructure necessary to solve every crime that has DNA everywhere. When we first built Othram, we realized that very few crimes with DNA were actually being solved using forensic genetic genealogy. And the reason for that is the science that was being used was science that was built for medicine or consumer genomics, where the DNA that you give when you go to the doctor's office is fresh, it's single source, it's stored in the right temperature. It doesn't have any of the complications that you see in DNA when you go to a crime scene. And so we decided that's not good enough. We needed to build a process that was predictable and in advance before you consume that evidence, predict whether or not you can actually help that case. It could be conservative for budgets, and it could be scalable because there's hundreds of thousands of unsolved cold cases in the U.S. alone, and every single year there are so many hundreds of thousands more violent crimes with DNA that could be solved using this technology. We're able to build DNA profiles that have so many letters that you can see really distant relationships. You can see a sixth cousin, a fifth cousin, a fourth cousin. We get hundreds of matches in each one of these investigations when we upload our profiles to genealogical databases consented for law enforcement use. And so when you get all these matches, we've built software that then triangulates what the most recent common ancestor is and allows you to start building that family tree. And very quickly, you can infer someone's identity. You know where they belong in a family tree. That gives you an answer and an investigative lead that didn't exist previously. And we started with the hypothesis of if you could build a forensic lab today in 2018 and not 30 years ago when DNA testing started in forensics, what would you do differently? And we did that.
If you're an armchair detective out there and you really want to get more involved in helping solve violent crimes, sexual assaults, murders, what can you do? What can you do with your company?
There are several ways that you can help. One, you can make sure your DNA is opted into Family Tree DNA. So when we search these profiles, we're able to immediately match you. Your DNA becomes a sonar, a puzzle piece to answer these questions. And like I told you, because we look at really distant relationships, we're almost all related. You'll help solve many crimes just by having your DNA consented into one of these databases. The other thing we do here at Othram is we realize that federal funding is limited mostly to the legacy forensic testing technologies. And so for unidentified victims, we have started a page called DNA Solves where you could help crowdfund $1, $5, what you would pay for a cup of coffee. You can read one of these stories and help someone get their name back and even justice. Most of the time that we help law enforcement identify a victim, it leads to identifying the perpetrator and what happened to them at the end of their life as well. And so it's pretty incredible to be able to be a part of that. Um, we have people that have gotten an answer, come back and become advocates and pay it forward to other cases. We have people that help try to solve answers in the area that they live in because they think that helps create a more safer place for where they are. People that are attracted to a certain type of crime because it's something they know has harmed someone they love or themselves in the past, and so they look for a certain type of victim. But it's really incredible to know that you can actually help someone get an answer just by putting a few dollars.
Well, and, like, it's a you're saying it costs, like, about the same as a cup of coffee? That's how much you could put into it, but how did you get the idea to crowdfund on this? I mean, you're a private company, right?
We are. It was David's idea. I actually told him it was not going to work. I said, "What are you talking about?" But he said, "Kristen, the only limiting factor, we had DNA for this one case. It was the mostly harmless case. And he was someone that many hikers had met along the way on the trail. And when he died, he had no identification on him. No one knew who he was. There were no answers, and they had tried everything to identify him, and they couldn't. And law enforcement said, "We want to use Othram. Could you do this?" We knew we could, but the funding wasn't there. And so David said, "I am going to crowdfund this from the people that are talking about this on the internet. I'm going to ask them to help." And I said, "I don't think it's going to work." And he said, "Why not? Why can't we just contribute a few dollars and get an answer?" And we did. We did within a matter of weeks. From the time that people crowdfunded the case, we were able to identify what area he was from. And then I put targeted ads there and identify him. It was amazing. And it was a difficult case because he was of Cajun descent, which causes endogamy. And so the genealogy was interesting, but he was still identified rather quickly. And it led to everyone getting those answers. Um, and
What is
David said,
rather quickly? Tell me what is rather quickly?
a few weeks.
Oh,
A few.
okay.
I mean, if we're working a contemporary homicide or rape homicide case, we can do it in a few days, because we know that perpetrators out there probably committing more crimes. Otherwise, it takes about a few weeks here at Othram now to identify someone, and that is because it's like flying a plane. When you run these sequencers, if you have more passengers, it costs the same. And so we try to bin cases that are similar together so that we can be more efficient.
Well, and Kristen, so, tell me with this case, this hiker, when you this was your, like this was your ground zero. This was your first case that you crowdfunded to see how it
Mhm.
worked, right? So when that happened, like, what happened? You when you identified him?
Law enforcement announced his identity. It was incredible because so many people were speculating who he was, that there were people were speculating he was that he wasn't. And it was affecting their life in a negative way and their family's life in a negative way. And so they reached out and thanked us. Then some of the people he met along the way reached out and wanted to understand more about this technology and how they can help in future cases. Law enforcement was super excited and grateful to the community for helping them answer this question. Um, this wasn't a homicide. This case was not a homicide. And so there wasn't an investigation, but most of the time, these cases are homicides. And so law enforcement then gets involved and begins their investigation into what happened the last few weeks of that person's life, and how they got there. And most of the time, it actually leads to an answer. When you don't know who the victim is, how do you solve a case? You
Mm.
can't. Unless you have an eyewitness, you really have nothing to go on. But once we identify that victim, you can figure out how they got there, who they were with, who they last spoke to. And that's usually super exciting. Um, I think what we got, the biggest reaction we got is, "I can't believe it worked. I can't believe that the only thing that was missing was the funding." And it honestly became the initial spark to getting the government to start funding some of these cases. And as we started to crowdfund more and more and more cases, we built pilot studies. We took, you know, 30 cases in Mississippi, and we were able to say, "Give us 30 completely different cases. And here's some crowdfunding from philanthropists." We put it together and all of them solved. So that tells the government that maybe you should start considering funding this technology, even though it's not something that has happened in the past. So now there are pots of funding that are beginning to become available for forensic genetic genealogy. It's still not enough to solve every case. Um, And so the ones that you see on our website are the ones that don't have funding or can't get funding through the methods that are out there. Because, there are some rules that say if you find unidentified remains, unless you know for sure that it's a homicide, you can't use funding, federal funding, to actually identify that person. To me, that's devastating. We have found unidentified remains that you couldn't tell. It was just a little piece of a skull found in
Mhm.
the desert. And then we crowdfunded the case. And when we identified the victim, they were able to then identify the person that murdered her and that buried her out there. The family thought that she had gone back to Mexico because the perpetrator wrote a fake letter. They didn't even know she wasn't even a missing person. There was no case outside of being able to give her name back. And now the perpetrator is serving time in prison for the crime. He's already been convicted. And so to me, I don't think anyone should be unidentified because how do you know the ending of their story if you don't know who they are? And the crowdfunding allows us to give people those answers.
Kristen, it's incredible. And when I was looking at the different cases on there, tell me, does it at this point does it have to come from a law enforcement agency, or can anybody just come to you and say, "Hey, I want to know more about this case or that case"? Does it have to come out of the police department?
Yes, so the evidence belongs to law enforcement. So anyone can say, Kristen, I'm really interested in this case, or this is my family's case, and I think your technology can work. And then we'll have our law enforcement liaisons reach out to the law enforcement agent that's the custodian of that evidence. But the evidence has to come to us from law enforcement. They have to say, yes, I want to use this technology. But honestly, most law enforcement do. They just don't know how to get funding for it, or they don't know that it exists. So we don't usually reach out to people and they say, no, we don't want to use the technology. That doesn't really happen. Everyone wants to
Was it
solve the case.
was it hard at the beginning though, like when you first came to them as a private company saying, "Hey, we're Othram," and they were like, "Who's Othram and why do you want these bones? What are you gonna do with these bones or
Oh,
this
yes.
woman?"
Oh, in 2019, I think we got 5 pieces of evidence the whole year and solved 5 cases and we tried every day because people didn't understand and didn't know this technology, definitely had never heard of Othram. And so it was really hard in the beginning. We got it more no's than anything, but now it's not hard at all. And I think that that's incredible. Now, honestly, we don't even call to solicit for evidence. Most evidence just comes to Othram. They call us. But you can see the difference. There are hundreds of cases on our website that are resolved already and announced. There are thousands of cases throughout the United States that we have been able to solve with this technology. Some really big cases that are contemporary, like Kohlberger, um, Long Island serial killer, we were involved with. All these cases that got us in the front page of the news. And that's helped people to realize that, wait a minute, this works and this works in real time, and we'd like to use it in our investigation as well.
Yeah, and okay, so some of these, and I wanna talk about these big cases as well, but I wanted to ask you about the little cases. On the little cases, like, this is where the crowdfunding could be really important, right? Because a police station might not have how much does it cost right now?
It costs about $10,000 or less to solve one of these cases. And so from beginning to end, and that includes like reference testing once they identify someone, includes everything from beginning to end. And so when we crowdfund, I think we still crowdfund only $7,500, and Othram puts in the rest um, of the labor and cost into each one of these crowdfunds, um, because we made a promise to people that every dollar that is ever crowdfunded goes directly to that case and nothing else, reagents for that case and the cost of that case. And then we obviously let the people know that we've been able to help and solve the case by putting the story back up on DNA Solves as it happens. And that's pretty exciting to see that there's actual impact. And now you filled one of those hexagons with someone's story. Crowdfunding is still necessary for most small departments across the United States. Some of the larger departments have been able to secure funding for this technology now, but unless you're savvy and you have a grant writing team and you know how to get some of these limited funds, it's very difficult to fund this technology. And unless it is one of these cases that's making front page news, it's very hard for law enforcement to be able to create a budget for this. And so a lot of these cases are sitting there. They're just sitting there and they could benefit from this technology. And that's what DNA Solves is.
Well, and DNA Solves, so DNA Solves is on your website at from Othram, so you can go to dnasolves.com. What are the kind of cases that people could contribute to help solve? What are they looking at on DNA Solves?
They're usually unidentified remains. We can't put a perpetrator case on DNA Solves first because, well, you would let the perpetrator know you're working the case and they may disappear. So we wouldn't want to do that. So the cases that we can crowdfund are the identification of victims. And we have a lot of them on there, and they're all different. Sometimes they're children, sometimes they're adults, sometimes they are obvious homicides, sometimes they're not. Um, and we really believe that everyone should have their name back and everyone should be pieced back to their family and the ending of their story. I really feels terrible to know that there are unidentified bones out there that can't have a headstone. And there's someone's family out there that's missing that person that doesn't know what happened to them. I've gotten to meet hundreds of families over the last few years doing what we do. And the one thing I've realized that I didn't before doing this job is that family doesn't quit looking. When someone in your life is missing, they live in the same house for 40 years, hoping that person comes back, keep the same phone numbers, go back to their favorite place every single day, hoping they'll show up, look on the internet for hours, spend almost all of their expendable income on hiring detectives or investigators to look for their family member. Um, they believe different outcomes, like maybe their loved one left on purpose and doesn't want to be found, yet their loved one didn't leave, they were murdered. And being able to give them the truth, even though the truth, when it comes from Othram, is not good news because we've identified someone that is deceased. um, I've never met a family member say that it anything but thank you because this allowed me to turn the page to the next part of my life. I was consumed trying to figure out this answer for so long. And it is an honor to be able to do that for people. And we couldn't do it without DNA Solves.
You were saying that there was 2 parts to it, like, yes, you can give money, but you can also, you know, upload your DNA profile or, do a swab kit with Othram to actually get your DNA in the system, as it were.
Yes.
Um, what profiles do you take? I mean, do you go to ancestry.com? How do you access these DNA profiles?
So we only use DNA databases that are consented for law enforcement use. We have our own DNA Solves, and we run the largest DNA database consented for law enforcement use for forensic genetic genealogy, family tree DNA. And there's one more called GenMatch. Those are the only three that are out there. And we use all three when we need to for investigations.
How do you handle the privacy concerns on something like that? Do
So that
people get sketched out on that?
maybe, and I think it's a personal decision for each person. Our terms of service are on our website. You can read them. Nothing we do at Othram has anything to do with anything other than solving a crime. So if you give your DNA to DNA Solves, then it will be used for absolutely nothing else. We don't even give you your relatives back. You can't see it, you can't read it. It's in a locked um, database so that law enforcement can match uh, possible perpetrators or victims to give them their identity back. And that's it. I mean, if you have a cell phone, you've given away some of your privacy, right? You carry this cell phone with you, and we all know
Mhm.
we can figure out, geolocate where we carry this cell phone, right? And that's used in crimes, but it's used everywhere. I mean, if I say
So true.
If I
I
say
feel like
I
we're being
love
tracked
C4,
constantly.
in 10 minutes I'm going to have C4 ads on here, right? We all know that we lose some of our privacy using the cell phone, but this cell phone allows us to have so much convenience every single
Mhm.
day. And so to me, it's worth it. Being able to put your DNA in one of these databases consented for law enforcement use allows us to live in a safer world. And so to me, it's worth it.
The idea that you're going to get to a place that you can solve crimes and find missing persons that have seemingly, like, just vanished. Um, do you think we're gonna get to a place where this is so commonplace?
Oh, 1,000%. I think we're going to get there faster than people even expect. The goal was to build technology that is robust, predictable, and scalable. I think Othram has proven we've done that. Um, we can work almost every case we get that has DNA, and we continue to do research on our research side of the lab until every case is tractable. We can predict our success. That's incredible. I think people understand that now. Now it's time for us to give this technology to others. So we are working on transferring this technology to all state labs, and anyone else that is a law enforcement agency across the world, so that Othram isn't the only Othram. There need to be thousands of us so that we can all do it. We can all solve every case this way. It was never the intent that Othram runs every case. We just had
Mhm.
to show that it can be done differently and it can be done in a predictable manner. And so once it's transferred, then I think we continue to require it, right? Right now, if you have traditional DNA testing is required in investigations if there is DNA. And so if you can't solve your case and you have DNA, you do the CODIS test, and that's subsidized by our federal government. Um, but then if the CODIS test is a dead end, you don't have a perpetrator in the database, then your case is stuck. If the federal government were to subsidize using forensic genetic genealogy, you can unstick that case because you can infer the identity and then law enforcement can confirm it using the original CODIS test at the end of the investigation. And so you could just solve all those crimes. Um, there are dozens of cases where I know we identified a perpetrator right before they were able to commit the next crime. Dozens already.
Oh my
Um,
god.
the investigators would call us back and say, you know, we caught him right before he attacked again on Friday because he was raping every Friday. Or we caught him and he had four other victims he was staking out and now they're going to go home. Those victims have gone home to live perfectly normal lives and they don't even know they would have been a victim of crime, a victim of the next serial killer. That means the world to me. We've been able to identify unidentified human remains where identifying them gave their family answers and peace that they needed. I just met somebody. She came up to me at CrimeCon. Um, I didn't even know who she was. And she told us a story about how her best friend, we identified her best friend's mom, and her best friend had lived her whole life thinking that her mom put her in a closet and her brother to leave them, to abandon them, left them in this closet, and was gone forever. And when we identified her, it showed that she was murdered that day. And she was
So she
protecting
was
her
trying to
children. She hid them.
Oh,
And then
she hid
she was
them.
taken. She hid them. And it changed her whole life to know that one answer. And so um,
Oh, Kristen, that's incredible. I mean, what did you think when you heard that?
I
That
cried because and I stayed with her for 3 hours in the middle of the night because it's life changing. To
Mhm.
us, it's a DNA test, one more investigation, but to someone, it changes their life. And to be able to be a part of that over and over and over again, to be able to be a part of building the infrastructure, to do that everywhere, this crowdfunding stuff that we talk about, that's what's causing the government to say, wait a minute, if the only thing missing between being able to give people these answers, being able to create a safer world for all of us is funding, why are US citizens, tax-paying citizens paying for this instead of buying a coffee today when this should be the government's responsibility to pay for? And every time we fund a case and we solve it, we're pushing the government to do the right thing.
Well, can we talk about Tina Hines real quick? I would love to hear a little bit about this case because this is also this blew me away. Tell me about Tina Hines. What we know about that case.
So this is a case that came back to us from Florida a while back, and she was murdered in her apartment while her husband was out in deployment. She was pregnant when she was raped and murdered. It was a very cruel crime. Her brother-in-law was spending the night in the apartment in the adjacent living room couch, and for the longest time, he actually was incarcerated for the crime. And
Mhm.
so they
Her
thought,
her brother his brother went to prison s as the killer, as her killer. Is that right?
right, he was her brother-in-law and her husband's brother that went to prison because he was spending the night on the couch, and they thought it was impossible for him to have been in the house during this attack and not hear anything or not actually be the perpetrator. And so he spent I believe over 10 years in jail for
Yeah.
this crime. Then they were able to do some DNA testing that showed that he was not the perpetrator, but they couldn't find the actual perpetrator. They had no suspect. And that's when the prosecuting office actually came to Othram and said, look, this is a terrible crime. We need your help. Can you build a DNA profile from this evidence? And because it was an older crime, because the evidence was a mixture, a difficult mixture of perpetrator and victim, it took some time to build this DNA profile, but we were able to build it. And there were so many twists and turns in this genealogical investigation because the person we were looking for actually had um, different parents from who we thought it was in the family initially, but we were able to identify a family unit, and we were able to tell law enforcement that we think that it's one of these few people that committed this crime. They did reference testing and they saw that yes, it's true. One of these people and these family members in this family committed this crime. And then as they started to investigate, they realized that one of these people actually was a friend of the husband in the Navy with the husband and might have known the family. They were able to collect DNA and do a standard CODIS test to confirm the identity of that person as the perpetrator. That was confirmed and he was arrested.
And I found this on, like, your support helps solve cold cases. But this was not a cold case. This was a case of a mistaken identity, basically, right?
Yes. And it was a case where there was no other leads. And so it was a case where you couldn't truly, I mean, we've exonerated several people using this technology, and someone once said that even though they were no longer in jail, true exoneration only comes when the people around them understand that someone else has been confirmed as the perpetrator of that crime. Because there's always that doubt in everyone's mind in the
Right.
community when you don't have an actual perpetrator. And so being able to identify someone and say, yes, their DNA matches 100% the DNA left at that crime scene allows the family members of the wrongfully accused to go, definitely wasn't them, to breathe for the first time.
Mhm.
And so,
And maybe rebuild some connections, like, maybe become a part of that family again for this family member who spent 11 years behind bars. It's an incredible story. I wanna say thank you so much for talking to me today about this crowdfunding, and basically, we're gonna just tell people to go to DNA Solves, and they can do a couple of things. They could give some money, or they could upload their DNA and become part of the solution, right?
yeah, and they even less if you don't want to do either one of those, you can even just share these stories. If you read some of these solved cases or some of these cases that are pending crowdfunding to be solved and they say something to you or they're in your area, share them because law enforcement out there is going to read the story and go, "Wait, maybe I can use this for a different case," or Someone out there in the community may be interested in helping a next case. Share these stories, because that sharing the message that this technology is here and it works, and all we're missing is some funding, um, or education so law enforcement can bring more cases over here. That's also helpful.
How many cases are, on this right now? How many are there thousands of cases you've uploaded to Crowdfund?
No, but I think there's hundreds. There's hundreds on there right now. I don't think there's thousands. We limit them so that um, people don't get overwhelmed. There's thousands of cases that don't have funding that are sitting here at Othram today, but unfortunately, but we try not to overwhelm people. Plus, people can subscribe to like give $25 a month and they go across all the cases on DNA Solves. So we try to fund them rather quickly rather than let them stay up there for a long time. So we do a few at a time.
Ah, makes perfect sense. Well, thank you so much, Kristen. We're going to keep an eye on this. You and your husband are doing incredible work, as your team is. From the pictures that I've seen in that lab, like it looks like something out of the future.
It is. It is a forensic lab of the future, and hopefully that is what every forensic lab looks like in the future.
Imagine a world where there are no unidentified remains. Kristen and her husband David at Othram are well on their way to making that a reality. Let me know if there are any cases that you want Othram to look into, and drop it in the comments below. I may also look into that case. Speaking of cases, there's a $25,000 reward out right now for any information about a missing child case, Andrew Amato. He's been missing since 1978, and just this month, they went and looked for evidence in a body of water. Now, I'm going to speak to an FBI insider tomorrow about how these missing child cases have changed so much over the years and what they could be looking for right now.